Now, back in that last clip, I kind of glossed over one of the important topics that has to do with the import process. I showed you there with the PowerShell command that there is the ability when you import in a GPO to create what is called a migration table. And I kind of punted on that so that we could discuss this migration table here in this next clip. Let's assume we have down here our little installation GPO, this install SCCM agent GPO we created earlier. This is one example. Anytime you've got any of these installation or GPSI software installation GPOs, this is usually an example where a migration table can come in handy because the GPO itself includes some kind of link or association to objects that exist in the source domain. So without exactly having or building another domain here, let's kind of go through the process of doing an import of what might be another GPO from some other domain. We will have to play a bit of pretend here, because I just want to show you the use of this migration table so that you could automatically translate the source values into what's appropriate here in the target domain. Now, if I right-click here once again on this GPO and choose to import settings, and then I go through the same process I went through before where I skip the backup, where I identify the backup folder where the source GPO exists, where I choose the one I'm looking for, which is down here, that install SCCM agent view, or that GPO. And if I come here to view settings, you can just see the different settings that have been configured here on this GPO. What we did, I believe, right here under assigned application is this config manager client setup bootstrap. Now, in order to do that, we had to configure here just some specific information about where to find this information, or where to find the installer file for this installation. Right here, you can see the deployment source is DC in the CCM setup folder in that MSI that we created before. Ostensibly, when I make that move from the old domain to the new domain, it's probably likely that there's going to be a different location in this new domain where that folder and share may be. And so it's for this and really any other reason where you've got a linkage that you can use a migration table in order to support the transfer of those settings from one location to the other. Now, let me back out of this for just a second, because what I want to show you here is that in the properties of this domain, we can open up what's called the migration table editor. In fact, it's not here, it's under domains itself. So here we can take a look at that migration table editor, which provides us, as you can see here, the source name, the source type, and then the destination name, essentially the translation of that value into the new value. Let's go about actually creating some values here that we would use in transferring this GPO from our fake other domain into our domain here. So let me pop up here under Tools, and let's populate the migration table editor from the values that exist in an existing GPO. Now, we know that there's some values here in that GPO that correspond with that installation, right? That's the one we're looking at. So let's populate this with those values here and choose OK. Notice here the source name is set to DC CCM setup, and that's one of those values that our migration table editor here recognizes as something that should probably be replaced. We can here on the destination name then enter in a different destination name. So perhaps file1/CCM setup as being the new destination name for the GPO. Now, one of the things you should recognize pretty quickly here is that this is not a terribly intelligent solution. And what I mean by that is that we're literally looking at a series of text values and doing a find and replace on those text values when we go through importing in this GPO here in just a second. So let's just save this migration table here. We'll save this table here on the desktop, and we'll call this SCCM agent so that we can come back to it here in just a second. I'll choose Save and close this down so that we can now go through the import of what, again, is ostensibly from this other domain, a group policy object that we want to then import into the one we've created here. I'll come up here and choose Import Settings, and then the next button, and then the next button again, and go all the way through to the other end of this wizard here, where I can choose Next again. And it's in this location where the wizard actually identifies, just like what we saw with the migration table editor, the values that perhaps need to be converted as we go through importing in this GPO. Notice here the scan results say, hey, this backup contains references to security principles and or UNC paths. So we now have to identify how we actually want to go about making those changes, if indeed we do. We could copy them identically from the source, or we could use a migration table to map them to whatever's necessary here in the destination GPO. Notice here that it's pre-populated in that migration table file that we created a second ago. So if we hit Next here and then Finish to go through completing this import, Here you'll notice that the wizard actually completes the migration. The actual import failed here because there is no folder at file1 CCM setup, and there is no file existing at that location either. But this does give you an idea for the process you would go through, should you have need to transfer around those GPOs from one domain or other location to another. Now, one further thing I want to show you here, if we come back to the migration table view, which is back up here in the properties of domains, one of the things you might want to take a look at also are just the possible values that might exist on the different GPOs that you're working with. Now, if I come back here to Tools and populate again the migration table editor from a GPO, let's pick a completely different GPO and see what values exist in that other GPO that might be adjusted. For example, this is our Direct Access Client Settings GPO that we created back a couple of courses ago. Let's hit the OK button here, and you'll notice that there actually is no information that appears in the migration table editor. If you get no results here, what this means is that there are no locally oriented locations that are referenced in this GPO. And so it's reasonable to expect then that the values in the source location in that source domain are ones that are going to translate correctly to the values here in this target domain. You can then use this migration table editor as kind of an initial gut check to see exactly what kinds of values exist in a GPO, as at least an initial verification as to whether that GPO is going to work here in this target domain.